All right. So we were looking at the architecture from Mesopotamia. You know, Mesopotamia is primarily in today's country of Iraq. Mesopotamia, the civilization went on for many thousand years. In the 6th century BCE, a giant neighbor rose from the Iranian plateau, and this is the Persian Empire. It conquered Mesopotamia like the previous northern neighbor of Assyria and the Hittite, etc. Now in the 6th century, the Iranian force, Persia, conquered not only Mesopotamia, but the entire Anatolia, that today's Turkey, and the ancient Levant, which is today's Palestine, Lebanon, those areas. And eventually the Persian Empire start invading Europe and face directly the rising Greek city-states. So that was in the 5th century BCE. The capital of the Persian Empire, the Persian Empire had multiple capitals, but one of the best preserved is the Persepolis, which is in eastern Iran today. Persepolis is actually a Greek term. The Greek called the city-state polis, and Persepolis is basically the Persian castle or the Persian city. The city was constructed pretty much following the head model in the construction of capital cities. Today, the great monument from the Persian Empire survived primarily from the palace city, which were constructed in stone and survived the many thousand years of vicissitudes. The city itself extend from the high ground on the northwestern part of the city and to the flatland. So today when we talk about Persepolis, we refer primarily to the palace city. This is like the inner city and the palace headquarters in, for example, Khorsabad or Nimrud from the Assyrian period. And the Persepolis, planning of Persepolis was probably inspired by those great predecessors of the Assyrians and the Neo-Babylonians. The empire, founded by Darius I, and the city first founded by Darius I and constructed by 3 successive reigns. So by the time the Persepolis was being constructed, Persia had already controlled the eastern part of the Greek world, the Asia Minor, that is especially the island in the Aegean Sea, as well as the coastal area of today's Turkey. Those were primarily, built and developed by the Greeks. By that time, they were under the Greek control, under the Persian control. And the Persians had already conquered Mesopotamia as well as Egypt by that time. So the had the ability to assemble a huge army of craftsmen, and those are from different culture. There are Greek craftsmen. There were also, Babylonian craftsmen and Egyptians. They collaborated in the building of the complex. The result is a pluralist hybrid integration of the varied cultural heritage of the empire's different people. As a huge empire, those princes and chieftains from different parts of the empire visit Persepolis. They could probably find something familiar and really had a sense of belonging to a big empire. So as a result, Persepolis incorporate all those different architectural traditions. For example, like those Mesopotamian palaces, the complex was elevated on a terrace on a high platform of 40 feet high and 900 feet wide. So the whole complex is elevated on a high platform. And spatial display was basically, following a path ascending to higher and higher levels of platforms. For example, the main entrance here, after the long staircase, one stand on top of the platform, and in order to enter the first major hall, one needs to ascend another staircase. So it is located on another platform. So are the other major building complex. So basically using the platform to define different building groups. Persepolis is accessed through just one entrance, which is located on the northeastern part of the complex, and the whole complex is backed by a hill and overlooking the city at large. So the rest of the city basically spread on the southwestern part of the headquarters. So the single entrance made the control of the palace easier, which also is a characteristic of kind of castle headquarters. We will see this features in the Greek castles. For example, the Acropolis in Athens. They all featured just one kind of monumental entrance that is easy to defend, and which also made the defense of the castle easier. Persepolis broke with Mesopotamian tradition in that their rooms are mostly square, and their roofs are supported with columns. And as a result, the interior space at Persepolis are much larger. The previous Mesopotamian palaces were basically a collection of many smaller buildings, and each separated by massive walls. But here, columns were used to make a large space under one big roof, and we call these multi-column halls the hypostyle hall. So you will see the term later, not only here but also in future lectures. So hypostyle hall became a way to create large interior spaces, even though right now the interior spaces were kind of interrupted by these columns. Nonetheless, it allowed a gathering of large assemblage under one big roof. The palace is mainly ceremonial halls, residential buildings, and courtyards. Unlike the palace headquarters of the Assyrians and Babylonians, there is no kind of gigantic ziggurat that featured in a religious headquarters. The reason is because there is no need for large interior gathering space for the Persian religion. The fire ritual of the uniconic Zarathustra religion is practiced mainly outdoor. So we have those big halls surrounded by large exterior areas, and those are the main place for the practice of the fire worshiping religion. The single entrance featuring those gigantic staircase is topped by a monumental gate known as the pylon. And we have seen pylons start to appear starting with the Assyrian architecture, that to defining space, showcasing those military parades. And at Persepolis, pylon was used functionally to guard the entrance. It features two towers framing a central entranceway. It had that military features as a controlling gate with parapet on the top. And the form is very close to the Neo-Babylonian city of Babylon from the 7th century BCE, built by the what's the name? I can kind of miss the blank on the name of that the king, the Neo-Babylonian king. That is, later reconstructed in the 1980s by Saddam Hussein. So this kind of a pylon, monumental pylon, is borrowed directly from the Babylonian type, which is also connected with the previous Assyrian ones. The staircase was arranged in a symmetrical fashion, like those ziggurat from earlier period, like the Ur ziggurat. And here it's split from the middle and then converge at the top, directly facing the entrance. Along the side of the steps, there are relief carvings, and the relief carvings are the figures in the relief carving face the same ascending direction. So one come up from the steps felt as if they were participating a parade, paying homage to the king. And those images was probably kind of depicting this kind of homage paying assemblage. And they were holding ceremonial utensils, and so as if there is a ritual kind of a welcoming at the entrance for those coming to visit. Remember, Persepolis is the headquarters where the king of Persia reside from time to time, and those ambassadors and also visiting leaders from the provinces would come, and when they come, they will sure to pass through this gate to enter the palace. And the carvings here certainly give the entrance space a sense of ritual performance. After that, there is a freestanding pavilion, which features three exits or three entrances on the west side, on the south side, and on the east side. So this gate is known as the Gate of All Lands. And because those people come visiting are from virtually all over the known world for the regime. This gate is known as tripylon. The tri-pylon, basically. It got three pylons, three towered entrances, not onto the north side, but only to those sides where a visitor is supposed to travel, to enter and exit. The tripylon was used basically to organize the passage, regulate humans' activity within the palace. So from the first tripylon, one turn right to face one of the major ceremonial halls. And if one goes straight, after passing a narrow space and passing through another pylon structure, one would be standing in front of another major hall. This is called the throne hall, and this is called the audience hall. So these are the two major ceremonial spaces. These are the place during festival, the Persian king would organize large gathering, and these are also the space where the king would have a hearing, have a court meeting with those visiting ambassadors. So these are like the semi-public part of the Persepolis. They are closer to the entrance, surrounded by large space, and feature those ceremonial facade. But after the second tripylon, there is a second tripylon right here. The space became more private. These are the residential quarter, the harem, the residential chambers of the kings built by successive Persian kings. The majority part, like this southern part, was built by Xerxes, the king who invaded Greece. So these are kind of more private quarters, and the tripylon was scaled down, and the gates became smaller, and to give you a kind of a sense of privacy. These tripylons are, organizing the passage inside the palace, and they were also meant to demonstrate the authority and the power of the kings. Each doorway is guarded by a pair of winged bows. So these winged bows, you can find good example in the MFA. So there are some of them were from the Persian period that looks almost exactly like these. Human-headed, featuring wings and powerful legs, but showing a royal face, featuring those long beard that were kind of characteristic of rulers. So in one word, the way people travel inside the palace was organized through these ceremonial gates, the pylons and tripylons. In another word, people's activity were regulated. So this is one thing I would like to highlight, that the architecture and architectural design has more to do with how you want people to behave in the space than the physical walls and pillars you put up. It is architecture, the first and foremost task of architectural design is to organize human activity inside the space being defined by the physical walls. That is the main content of the design. So once architecture will put up, there is a certain kind of human activity being expected, and the architecture is successful if it produced the aimed human behavior and human activity. And these behavior and activity is something that I call ritual. And this ritual activity does not only include religious ceremony, but also includes the day-to-day interaction of human beings, even within the same family. So architecture defined space to induce a certain kind of activity and behavior. The audience hall, which is the very first monumental building after a guest entering the main space, as mentioned before, is elevated on a high platform. The platform elevate the main building from the ground, features two monumental staircases on the northern and eastern side, facing the square. So these are like the ceremonial ground for Zarathustra fire religion. And so these facades are public facade, framing the ceremonial ground. And they also features those symmetrical staircases. And those staircases were also decorated with parading figures, parading ceremonies. The west direction is facing the city at large. It is more private. However, the facade is visible from the rest of the city, right? So this is kind of a head model of the city. So this is the Persepolis, which is the headquarters. The city at large, extend from the other direction. And there is also kind of originally big avenues like those ones in Khorsabad and Nimrod. So that is also a very important face because it's visible from outside, even though it is not meant to be accessed by the public, by the ceremonial teams. But the king standing on the high platform here overlooking the city at large and overlooking the parading armies, and it really gives the king a sense of being in control and rule over the rest of the world, elevated on that high ground. The southern side is a private, right? The southern side, the facade is not public. It features a series of small rooms, and those rooms are for storage. And those storage, the kind of a storage space is a characteristic of those ceremonial big architectures, because those ceremony require material, and those could be stored there, including wine, including other utensils. And so that is also adjacent to the private living quarters. And so that is totally private side of the of the audience hall, which is also known as a Patana, that audience hall. So today the platform is preserved in excellent condition, and the roof, of course, all collapsed, but the columns that used to support the beam, some of them are still standing in very good condition. These columns are monolithic columns, right? So monolithic means just one piece of stone. Because not all columns are monolithic. For example, Greek temple, their columns are not monolithic. It is a tall, linear element in architecture, but it is made of many, many small drums. So it's not monolithic. But the Persian Persepolis, these columns are just one big piece of stone. So it's much more difficult to craft compared to the Greek temple. You first need to find a big piece of stone and shape it into this tall cylindrical form, and then raise it and put it up. So it's definitely require much greater manpower and much greater resource, something that the huge empire of Persia was able to do, but it is very hard for those kind of small city-states of the Greek world to achieve something of this kind of gratitude. So they are monolithic columns. The columns are stone, of stone, but the roof was timber roof, wood. So they used stone column supporting those beams and rafters to support a flat roof. And many columns work together to cover a large area of interior space. It was said that as many as 10,000 people could gather in the audience hall simultaneously. It has that kind of large space. The north, east, and west side of the Patana also feature the kind of a monumental porch. You have this space that is in between exterior and interior that is open to the surrounding exterior, however, covered by a roof. And those are, ideal space for the ruler to address the mass, to address a large gathering. For the north and the eastern part, to address the religious gathering, and for the western porch to address the parade and the city at large. So here we have a more detailed plan for the Patana Hall. You can see the north side, west side, east side, and the southern private storage. These are the stairs for the north and east platform, and featuring those, ascending parade. They were shown bringing in those sacrificial items and paying homage to the rulers inside. It is probably depicts the annual festival of Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which is still celebrated in Iran, and having kind of a similar ritual activities as being depicted here. A reconstruction drawing of the Patana showing once upon a time when the roof was there, how these masonry column and the wooden roof were combined. The dimension of the square hall 250 feet wide, 60 feet high, and accommodate large population. And the illustration give you a sense of scale. So these monolithic column, they are not only monolithic, they are also kind of megalithic, continuing the Neolithic tradition of building with large scale stone. But these columns were much more refined, carved into detailed and complicated forms in both kind of figurative images as well as decorative patterns and human figures in comparison with these giant columns, seems tiny. The gate, the openings are also monumental. So these are super human scale monuments, compared to the later, much more famous Persepolis, the much more famous Acropolis in Athens. Persepolis is much bigger in scale. So this is another picture showing the Patana and its relationship with the rest of the city, right? So the rest of the city basically spread at the foot of Persepolis. And here, the ceremonial space, the Patana hall, and the porch there overlooking the city at large. Columns at Persepolis were decorated with capital on the top. And these capitals feature animal decoration, animal sculpture, especially bulls, and sometimes lion and horses. These are three kind of major favorite decorative motifs for Persian capital, Persian columns. And this one, here we have a bull. And the bull and the other animal as well are often shown as two-headed sharing one body, creating that V or U-shaped indent. And these U-shaped space was to receive the wooden beam that would be resting on top of the stone capital. So the columns shows the multicultural feature of the Persian culture and the Persian empire. For example, we have these bowls, and these bowls are time-honored symbol for power, and especially for the male fertility symbol, and also masculine power as well in Mesopotamia, and also had a time-honored lineage to Neolithic art in the region. So we have kind of a ancient Mesopotamian motif in the capital, but below that we have those scrolls that is very much like the volute in Ionic capital from Greek architecture, something we will look at in the following lectures. This is an Ionic capital from classical Greek architecture, and these are very much like, these are called a volute in Ionic classical order. So this looks very similar to volute in Ionic order. This is the Greek heritage, right? And below that, we have this kind of lotus petal. And this lotus capital is a characteristic of Egyptian architecture. So this is an Egyptian capital of lotus. In Egypt, there are two major capital styles, the lotus capital and the papyrus capital. So here we find these lotus flower motif as well. So in the Persian capital, we find the Mesopotamian, Greek, and Egyptian architectural motifs combined in one, showing the multicultural feature of the Persian culture. And this is also the characteristic of a relatively tolerant empire, tolerant regime that absorb and blending those cultures from different corners of the empire into one. And indeed, according to record, craftsmen from Asia Minor and from Egypt were brought to Persepolis to directly be engaged in the construction and the supervision of the construction. So here I'm showing you another capital, a bowl here, and here we have a horse. They were kind of basically sculpted in the similar fashion, two heads sharing one body to create that in that V shape to receive wooden beams, or Y shape, whatever you like to call it. So they were directly worked by craftsmen from different parts of the empire. The detail of the stair, right? A Mesopotamian characteristic of monumental architecture, using high platform to organize space. And this reconstruction drawing shows during the Nowruz festival, for example, what the space might look like, right? So the gathering in the courtyards and framed by those monumental facades that provide a backdrop, like a stage backdrop for those ceremonial activities. The current situation, all those column base survived, and some of the walls as well. And some columns are still kind of free-standing. Another major hall, that is the throne hall, which is in the back. That throne hall is also known as a hall of 100 columns. It has exactly 100 columns inside. This throne hall is kind of more one-directional. What do I mean by one-directional? Because it shows only one public facade, right? The audience hall shows 3 or 2 to the ceremonial space. The throne hall only shows 1. The other facades were basically hidden, not meant to be seen or to be provided as a major backdrop for activity. So in terms of the ritual activity perspective, it is one-dimensional. It's the north facade that is meant to be shown to the public, to provide monumental backdrop for ceremonial activity. And indeed, according to some historical record, that ambassadors visiting from far away were meant to go straight after the tripylon and goes directly into this courtyard and wait there to meet the king. While the king's welcoming team, while welcome the guests from far away, they would pass through the southern exit from the tripylon and report to the king, and the king going from his quarter and appear directly from the back door inside the throne hall and wait there for the ambassador to show up to meet him. So architecture space was designed in a way to facilitate the ritual activity of diplomatic meeting, right? It gives you a great sense of being a host or being a guest. The host is waiting inside, giving them a sense of being in control and dominant and in authority. While the guests coming from far away, they are constantly moving, and they are the active one coming to pay homage to the king. So this space, to some extent, is an architectural space, kind of define and regulate the behavior of different parties of the ceremonial activity, and in a way to demonstrate the power relationship between the ruler and the regional provinces, the regional princes, the master, the guest, the relationship between the ruler and the subjects. And indeed, for these ceremonial spaces, they were all kind of designed in symmetry, showing monumental facade, and give people a sense of formal behavior. So these are not kind of casual spaces. While in the back, for the sleeping chamber of the kings, architecture is much smaller in scale, much more comfortable. You don't want to sleep in the hall for which the ceiling is like 50 feet above you. That's kind of a scary place to put a bed in. So for those living spaces, they are much more homey, and they are also much more lively. The symmetry was not highlighted as much as formal as those ceremonial spaces. So something like this is something that we can pay attention to, try to understand the relationship between architecture and human activity, and the design and the design of the physical structure, as well as and its relationship to the design of human behavior that was meant to be induced in the architectural design. So this is a reconstruction drawing of the throne hall, the hall of 100 columns. So literally 100 columns. So they are, the vision is not that great. You don't have a wide vista. You have a sea of columns, basically. Your vision is obstructed everywhere. However, it does allow a large amount of people to gather under the same roof to participate in the same kind of a ritual activity. Later, this kind of architectural space would be inherited by Islamic architecture. So in the future lectures, when we start looking at Islamic architecture, you will see this kind of homogeneous interior space that is not very much differentiated into main space and kind of secondary space. They are pretty much the same space under the kind of hypostyle type was also the characteristic of Muslim architecture.